Right, it is time we moved on to talk about, an annual event, Holocaust Memorial Day, and it marks 77 years now since the liberation of the Nazi death camp at Auschwitz-Birkenau. The day is for the victims of all genocides now. By the end of the Holocaust in 1945, 6 million Jewish men, women and children had been murdered. It's estimated around 570 Holocaust survivors are still alive in the UK today. Let's bring in Mike Levy, a Cambridge-based author who's written a book on kinder transport, which is being launched today in support of a child refugee charity. Hello, Mike.
Hello there, Chris. Nice to speak to you.
Nice to speak to you. And I have to say, well done for doing it, because you've got COVID at the moment, haven't you?
I have got a bit of the old COVID, yes. I thought I'd join the club.
How's it treating you?
Not too bad. Kind of mild symptoms, just feeling a little bit washed out, but, energised to speak to you.
Okay, well, delighted to have you on the show, and please, I hope you get better very soon. Thanks. Talk to us about how you feel on this day. What goes through your mind?
Well, it's a national and an international day of commemoration and remembrance. I guess what goes on in my mind is that it's a very good point, I think, to have one day in the year where we can remember what was a catastrophic event in European, if not world history, that is the Holocaust. And it was something that probably, historians would say that it was one of the most significant events of the last 500 years. Such was the scale. This kind of mass murder happening on our own, in our own continent, and organised by people of, high abilities and intellectual background and education and so on. So what goes on in my mind is that it does provide us with a very useful point, I think, in which to think about what happened in the past, and also look at the present to see what lessons we can learn, if any, of course, from those terrible events.
I read out the big numbers a moment or two ago in the introduction, the millions who died, the many more that suffered, the whole world shocked by this. But actually, I wonder if you agree, it's the individual stories that are so affecting. Tell us some of those that are in the book.
Yes, well, you're right. 6 million is a figure that none of us can really even begin to comprehend. And so the best way, I think, into this huge history, really, is to look at individual stories, as you rightly say. My book, called Get the Children Out, Unsung Heroes of the Kindertransport, is really looking at an unusual kind of aspect of the Holocaust in the sense of how did it impact on this country, not just this country, but also even our own area, Cambridge and Cambridgeshire. And it did impact it because although obviously we weren't occupied by the Nazis, we were the host country for many refugees who fled the Nazis and found refuge and succour here. So, for instance, in the book, I talk about a lady called Greta Burkill, who was chair of the Cambridge Refugee Committee. And they were reckoned to have, or to be, one of the most active of the refugee committees anywhere in the country. I think something like 800 children were looked after by the committee in the wider Cambridge and Cambridgeshire area, 800, by this bunch of volunteers.
And many stayed, of course.
Many stayed, yeah, they did, stayed in the area, certainly, or went down, to London or whatever, but yes, many stayed. And so it's this part of the story which I think I felt hasn't really been told, the British response, if you like, to something happening on the continent. And what was certainly true was that, people of goodwill and good standing wanted to do something to help the poor benighted victims of Nazism. And Greta Burkill herself, who was the chair of the Cambridge Committee, had this wonderful phrase, we must save the children. And they did their very best to try and save as many as they could. It was still a pinprick in terms of the numbers murdered, but still, 10,000 children came on the Kindertransport, and of those 800 came to the Cambridgeshire area.
Kinder, of course, the German word for a child, I should have mentioned before. And there's a very famous name, well, there's lots of famous names, but one in particular I'm thinking of, and that is the parents of Sir David and Richard Attenborough.
Yes.
They brought two young Jewish children into their home.
Yes, they did. Two sisters, actually, and famously, it's certainly in Richard Attenborough, the film director's autobiography, where their parents brought the three boys together, David, Michael, and Richard, and said, we want to take in two Jewish refugee girls from Germany, but we need to have your permission to do so, boys, because it will mean we're going to have to share our home and, most importantly, share our love with these children. And the boys agreed, and the two girls came to stay, spent the whole of the war years with the Attenboroughs, and I think I'm right in saying didn't see their natural parents again. To all intents and purposes, the Attenboroughs became their new parents. Complete strangers, but they kept up, as friends, almost as sisters, really, for the rest of their lives.
How much was known in this country about what was really going on in Germany and in those camps at this time when the children were arriving here? Was the full picture available?
Yes, it's incredible, isn't it, to think, in the days before the internet, there were such days, that news did really spread very quickly. And of course, the mass killing on a major scale didn't really start until 1941, the autumn of 41. So the children were escaping from what was very clear, the Nazi intention to murder them and their parents. But it really hadn't started yet on a big scale. I mean, they'd been bullied and persecuted and harassed and beaten up and all those sorts of things. But mass killings didn't really start until the autumn of 41, probably. And certainly by 42, so that's just 80 years ago, isn't it? It was everyone knew. In fact, the House of Commons had a special debate on, I think it was December 1942, on news coming from Poland about these new things called death camps, extermination camps, which was quite new, really. No one had ever come across such a thing before. So really, way into the sort of middle of the war, really, people knew a lot about what was happening. They knew about Auschwitz, they knew about Treblinka. These names were being shared even as early as 1942.
Today's the anniversary, the 77th anniversary of the Russians arriving at Auschwitz-Birkenau, and
yes.
then we really knew what had gone on. In particular, in your new book out today, you're looking at the female stories, the women's stories, right?
Well, a lot of them, yes. I mean, not exclusively, but we've got a lot of the women who helped to look after the children or bring them out in the first place. So people like Greta Bergkill, but also thinking of Cambridge people, Mrs. Hutton, Sybil Hutton, who was the wife of an academic here in Cambridge, and she was also the chair of the Children's Hospitality Committee. So it was her job to find homes for the children in the Cambridge area. And where the homes couldn't be found, because not everyone came forward to offer a home, she would take the kids in herself. And I think her home in Chaucer Road, just off Trumpington Road, became a virtual sort of orphanage for the children that she looked after. So yes, a lot of women, I think, particularly did an amazing amount of work in terms of rescue and welfare of the children. So Mrs. Hutton was certainly one, Greta Bergkill another. And then further afield, people like Mary Hughes, who was a Quaker in York, who took in children and organised homes for them. So it's a big story about welfare and about provision of care, in what was a pre-welfare state. People had to rely on their own, voluntary efforts to look after these children. There was no kind of social services as we know it, and no local authority care of children, none of that. So everything had to be done through volunteers, and most of the volunteers, I would say, were women.
Mike, how much of a personal mission has this been for you? How your involvement in this, your writing of this, because this is a project that's taken you a long time.
It has, yeah. I've been doing it on and off, I would say, for several years. I don't have any skin in the game, as they say. I don't have any family that were murdered in the Holocaust, but I'm obsessed by stories that haven't been told, and stories that deserve to be told. In fact, I was looking through the papers of Greta Bergkill held here at the University Library, And in it, she writes, this is in some years after the war, our story should be told. We did we did a good job. And we hope in the future someone will take an interest in what we did. So when I read that, I thought, well, that's got to be me. I've got, that's history calling out, isn't it, to someone to take notice. So I think I've kind of been obsessed by wanting to tell this story, a story that really hasn't been shared before.
Well done. The book is out today, Get the Children Out, published to coincide with Holocaust Memorial Day. Mm-hmm. It's available on lemonsoul.com for $8.99, right. Is that right?
That's right, lemonsoul.com, and £1 of every sale goes to the charity Safe Passage.